About 2 weeks ago, I was sleeping in my room, and I was awoken in a vision. And as I woke up, my room started to shift and change into a palace that was high and lifted up. And I was directed towards the window. And as I was walking towards the window, outside began to shift. Outside began to change. And it was like I was in Africa. And there was a great big fence that was around where I was. There was a hedge, a protection. And as I was looking, afar came 3 lions. And the 3 lions from afar looked all similar. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But one thing that was for certain is that they couldn't get past the fence. And as I was looking, the lions came to the fence and they sat. 2 of the lions kneeled down before the fence and kneeled down before me from afar and gazed into my eyes. And when they raised their heads, the gates were lifted for them. And the 2 walked in. And then there was 1 lion who stayed. And as the 2 lions were coming in and they were rising up, and I could feel them in my room, the lion that remained no longer looked like a lion. It began to show its true form, which I can't describe it, but it was like a lion, but it looked like a porcupine. And when the lion realized what the other lions had did to get in, he imitated and bowed his head. And when he raised his head, he realized the gates did not open. And he snarled and he roared, but there was nothing else that he could do. And this brings me to my message today. It's a family affair. You'll get where I'm coming from when I say it's a family affair. In this world, whether we like to accept it or not, there is one Father, one Son, one Holy Spirit. And that Father prayed for you. He did a prayer for you that locked you into a cycle of change and a cycle of protection in your life. Now, of this earth, there is an imitating father who's trying to imitate the same thing, but he can't unless you're able to see what's actually happening. So we have, for this message, for this topic, theoretically 2 fathers. One that prays for you, P-R-A-Y, and one that prays on you, P-R-E-Y. And the great thing about great fathers is that they have great sons. If you want to know a father, look at his son. A father will always show his son the lessons that he has learned. He will always prepare him for what's coming ahead. And he will always equip him with the resources that is needed to fight. And the fight isn't always with hands. See, now in this age, we think that if a father teaches you how to fight, teaches you how to take a hit, you're a man. But what I've come to learn is the father who teaches you how to be patient, how to be kind, how to love, how to give, how to forgive, is a true father. And that father has truly prepared you for your future. As we open up our books to Matthew 16, We're going to focus right now on the Father who's an imitator. See, what happens when you imitate, you're always going to someone to do something. You can't produce it yourself. See, what happens in this day and age is that you have the sons of God and you have the sons of Satan, of Lucifer. And the biggest problem is that the world can't tell the difference. The world doesn't know who is who. Because at the end of the day, when they're looking from afar, we all look the same. And the problem is they're too scared to come closer to see the difference. Because they've all been hurt from afar. So why come in closer if you've been hurt from afar? But as we go into verse 1, it says, Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came and tested him and asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, When it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. And as we continue to read, it says, Now when the disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take the bread. Then Jesus said to them, Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves and saying, It is because we have taken no bread. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Do you not understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up? How is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. As I was directed to this passage, one thing that I started to understand is that they understood that Christ did the miracle with the bread. It was either they were there from afar or they had spies looking. And when they came to Christ and asked him to show us a sign, this is a good thing about a father. The father he understands who comes before him and why you come before him. Sometimes as sons, and when I say sons, I don't mean just men. I'm talking in general, men and women. As sons, we think that we can tell who comes before us. But it's only with the Father's eyes can we tell the deception. And when they came to Christ, they asked to show a sign. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what sign do you want to see? And then I remembered, sons always believe in their fathers. Sons never doubt their fathers. And there's a reason why the Pharisees asked for a sign. Because they didn't believe. So they wanted something tangible, not spiritual. They wanted something tangible that could be done right before them, that they could scrutinize. Because everything that Christ did was done in physical, but it had a spiritual meaning. And there would be no purpose for him to show them a sign at this point in time. And then he tells the disciples to beware of the leaven, to beware of their ways, beware of their language, beware of their approach. And in this time and season that we're in, the Pharisees are coming. Because when you enter into the place of a Pharisee, there is no true spiritual unveiling. There is a physical unveiling, but there's nothing spiritual happening. And as I'm reading this and I'm thinking about the falseness of the Pharisees, I felt the Lord brought me back to Moses. And there's one thing as Christians and as followers of Christ we tend to forget. When Moses stepped into Pharisees' domain, his kingdom, there was a power that was already there. There was a force, a principality, a stronghold that made itself a kingdom. And we as Christians, we seem to forget that the enemy can imitate, but he cannot produce for himself a pure source. And the arrogance and the nerve of Pharaoh and his men, the arrogance and the nerve of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the arrogance and the nerve of the religious folk to drop their sticks and say, we can do it too. And I sat there and I wondered, how many of us Christians would at that point in time turn around and walk away? Where we would forget what the Father had shown us, where the Father took us, the life journey that the Father took us on, to show us the trueness in him and what came from him. But Moses stood. He didn't move. Honestly, at that point, if that was me, I think I would laugh. Because I know who my God is. And at that point in time, the snake that was released from Moses' staff swallowed, consumed. And that was the most important thing for me. It swallowed and it consumed. It didn't spit it out. It didn't digest it out. It swallowed and it consumed it. Then it returned back to its original form. So what goes to show is that God is taking back what the enemy stole. What the enemy wants to use, which is you. You don't understand, you're the sticks. You're the sticks. The enemy wants to put you down and show you, look what I can do with your people, your creation. And God says, okay, all right. Now let me show you how I can take them in and use them for my good. Because one thing we don't realize, that same staff is what split the sea. Is that same staff is what he used to walk up the mountain. It's that same staff. The same staff. And at that point, I sat there and I said, okay, God, I get it. I get it. There's so many people out there who are being used the wrong way. Our job is not to kick them out. As the title said, it's a family affair. They're your family. We have to see them as family. Because in our eyes, we don't know the difference. But through the Father's eyes, he can tell us who's son and who's daughter. So when you look through your fleshly eyes, do not cast anyone away. Do not throw a stick away. Because the Father tells you what stick can be used and what stick cannot be used. In my head, throughout this journey, throughout this season, there's been a character who's been in my head, and I can't get him out. His name is Peter. And I feel part of my assignment is to speak to Peter. There are Peters in here, there are Peters watching, and there are Peters all over. As I was reading in Luke 22, verses 31 through 34, at this point in time, 22. At this point in time, Jesus is talking to Peter. And he says, "And the Lord said, 'Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you, that he might sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brother.'" It's a family affair. It's a family affair. Indeed, Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. So, as I was reading this, I said I need to go deeper. I need to understand what is actually being said. And it says, indeed, Satan has asked for you. He has begged for you. He came to me with your name, that he may sift you as wheat. That word sift gave me a problem. I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't understand what the word sift meant. So I looked up the definition. Here's the dictionary, the regular dictionary definition. Means to examine or test thoroughly. And that's what you can find on any regular dictionary. And as I opened up my concordance to find the definition, it said to try to agitate one's faith to the verge of overthrowing them. And I have to take this detour real quick to speak to Peter right now. It's a family affair, Peter. God did not forget you. At this moment in time, Peter is thinking, what about me? What about me? Where is my father? Who is my father? But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you return to me, strengthen your brother. There was a handing over, a transaction that happened in heavenly places. There was permission given for your testing, for your agitation, for your frustration, and for your manifestation. And as I remember our apostle was speaking 2 Sundays ago, how the Old Testament does not fight against the New. But the Old Testament is the unrevealed, is the concealed, and the New Testament is the unveiling. And I can remember one character who went through the same process. And his name was Job. A lot of people don't understand what happened in this process of Job and Peter. There was a sound in heaven that was rung. There were continuous blessings that was said on these two that didn't stop. And what happened is the devil is walking around on earth looking, who are these people that I keep hearing about? Why do I keep hearing about them? And then he saw Job. Then he realized, okay, it's because of everything he has. He won't love you because it's only material. So God gave him the right. Nobody can go to the Father's house and just take what he wants to take. This is how strong your Father is, how mighty your Father is. Nobody can walk into his house and just take. God had set up the devil, and he continually sets him up in your life, in your journey. Because what happens is that the devil continues to ask for you. He continues to beg, to plead, to test you. Because we all know when you follow God, blessings follow. The power follows. His presence is within you. So there's always going to be a continuous testing because he wants to see will you ever break and bring shame to your Father. So at this point, God says, go ahead. Touch everything around my son, but do not touch my son. And this was a material testing. These were possessions the first time he went. And in this season, there's a lot of people who's going to be losing physical things. And you might wonder, why? How come? Why me? What did I do wrong? Those are the questions that always comes through our mind. But it's a testing. And what God wanted to show the devil was that no matter what you do, my sons remain my son. And the thing that was very interesting is because when you look at it, God chooses his sons. The devil doesn't choose them. So when God says, go ahead, trust and believe, the prayer was said for you. He prayed for you. He spoke to you, encouraged you. And sometimes we get so discouraged because it's not coming from the mouth of a preacher. It's not coming from the mouth of a church member, but it's coming from a stranger. It's coming from the wind. It's coming at night. You get the word of encouragement because it's a family affair. You're never left alone. So Job's possessions were taken away. And he continued. He said, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh. Then the next thing was a physical testing. This is where we as believers have a hard time because we've grown so attached to this physical body. We've become so adaptive to our senses that we forget that this flesh is just a mere coating. That the sufferings that we endure now don't compare to the glory that is waiting for us in heaven. So, the devil went for a physical test because we forget that we're not human beings. We're souls being human. We're spirits being human. But what Satan has done, he's tricked us into being humans being spirit. Now, we all know that doesn't make sense. We know that doesn't make sense, but there's so many who don't understand the difference. So the physical testing came, and he had boils all over his body, underneath his feet. So there was no place he could rest. Even while he was sitting, there was pain. And at the end of this testing, something important happened. His friends came. And they seen him from afar, but they couldn't recognize it was him. Then when they recognized it was him, they tore off their clothes. And he yelled. And then what happened is that they stayed with him. They didn't speak. They just stayed with him. And that right there showed me that your comfort comes from places that you won't even expect. His house wasn't there. His family wasn't there. But comfort came. Comfort came to hold him, to just sit with him. And then that brings me back to Peter. And I was sitting here and I was trying to find out, where is the comparison? Where is the comparison? And then it got me. There's no deeper pain than denying your father 3 times. There's no deeper suffering or deeper loss than to be one of the main reasons why he had to go through the crucifixion. And we all like to blame Judas, and Judas had a great big part. But Peter could have helped. He could have assisted. But at that point in time, he was already handed over. And Peter, when we concentrate on Peter, out of all the disciples, he received a level of revelation, a level of understanding of what happened while Christ was in the ground. And Christ called Peter a rock, which is upon the mother rock. And as I could think of what that rock would do on a mother rock is balance. As all the other rocks are positioned on the big rock, Peter was called to strengthen after all this stuff would happen. So the Father never forgot about Peter. The Father never abandoned Peter. Peter had to go through what he had to go through, not for his sake, but for his family's sake. And for the Peters who sit in the assembly, for the Peters who are listening, there's a reason why you had to go through what you went through. Your father did not leave you. He handed you over so that he could prove a point, so that he could show who the real creator and father is. When he says, I am Alpha and Omega, there's a reason why he says that. When you examine your life and you see all the scars and bruises, and then you can look to your right and to your left and you can see your brother and sister with less scars, less bruises, you start to figure out what's happening. In a true functioning family, the generations don't go through the same things that the older generation went through. The son should not go through what the father went through. And the grandson should not go through what the father or the grandfather went through. And as I was thinking about this, it's a family affair. And I started to pay attention to where we are in this city, in this world. And I'm starting to understand why it's a family affair. There are generations that are lost, that need to be consumed back, need to be taken back, so that the glory that is shown from them is greater than what's in us. See, the stick that Moses used to change to a snake, it may have looked like the same stick, but it changed. That new stick, consumed by the lost sticks, was able to split the sea, was able to allow Moses to aid him to walk up the mountain. And what's happening is that we've forgotten about family. The same thing that Christ came to show us, which was very important, was the connection of his sons and daughters. The family affair. That's what he came to show us. I feel this generation is beginning to move away from that. There are new doctrines. There are new beliefs. There are new churches, new pastors, new everything. And what's beginning to happen is that you get extended family. You're getting cousins-in-law twice removed. By law, 4 times removed. You can't even tell how they're connected to you. And what God is showing me is that that's exactly what's happening to his church. But what's going to happen is that there's going to be a consuming. There's going to be a consuming of these people. Because there's a father who's leading them, who is an imitator. And what he's going to do, he's leading his people up. He's leading his people. You. He's setting you up for pain, frustration, stripes, the beatings, everything, so that the consuming of your brothers and sisters can happen. There's some of you that will speak in front of crowds and get booed off of a stage. Your name will be slandered. People will look at your family and say words to them, curse words. But lo and behold, in the background, there's a brother and sister whose eyes is being opened. And what happens is that the devil's asking for you. Christ already prayed for you. He's focusing on the next one. So he says, go ahead, take him. The devil doesn't see the hedge, doesn't see the protection. He just begins to test and test and test and test and test. And through your trials and through your tribulations and through all the problems, the agony, the frustration, the pain, there's a brother or sister brought to Christ. There is a stick that is consumed. And then we can see the family affair. We've gained a brother. We've gained a sister. And this is just repeated in my head. Repeated. Because as I walk through the streets, as I'm at work, I can see people and I can see the trueness in them. I don't see what the world sees. There's some people that I see and God is just like, that's one. Slowly and surely, don't worry. Slowly and surely, don't worry. There's been a prayer that was set upon their lives. And in the natural, as a father and as a mother, you pray for your kids and you pray with your kids. You pray for their protection. You pray for their guidance. You pray for their knowledge. You pray for their lives. And it's done in the natural. And the natural reveals and it explains what happens in the spiritual. Every night you pray for your child. And if you don't have children, you should start praying for your future children. As you pray for them, there's a prayer being said for you. There's a prayer being said for them as well in the spiritual. And then what begins to happen is that you start to get prepared. You start to get fixed. You start to get look nice for the biggest trial of your life. Because God isn't a fool. God isn't a liar. And what Christ went through for us, we must go through for our brothers and sisters. Not for our glory. Not for our names in the clouds, for statues being made about us. But for that one day when he returns for his children. And there's a voice being spoken, and we recognize that voice. And we're able to look left, right, and see our brothers and sisters being carried up with us as we are going home. What kind of brother, what kind of sister would leave his brother outside? In the cold, in the winter, in the hot summer, when you have AC inside, when you've got heat inside, when you got marshmallows inside, when you got popsicles inside, who leaves their brother or sister outside in the weather? You see, what happened in the spiritual is that our God, our Father, stepped out of time into time to save us because we were outside. And as much as he wanted to bring us inside, we wouldn't go inside. So he had to show up in something that we could recognize, which is the Son, the figure of man, Son. So when one of our brothers started to take pain, started to get beaten, started to show us love, started to heal, then it started to make sense. Then there was an awakening because now it was a family affair. For us, in God's eyes, it was always a family affair. In our eyes, it became evident. It became real. And the one thing that the Son showed us was how to pray. See, the Father has always been talking to us from the house. We didn't know how to respond back to him. He was always preparing for us inside, but we didn't know how to prepare ourselves to go inside. So the Son, who was originally inside, came outside and showed us, this is how you talk to your Father so that you can come in. This is how you communicate when you're in help, when you need help. This is how you respond in times of turmoil, in times of joy. And it went like this. Our Father, which art in heaven, location, inside. Hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. See, the Father realized that we didn't know how to talk to him. And the Father realized that this was a family affair and that his sons needed to understand how to speak to the Father. Now, everybody knows you can't just walk up to your father and talk to him any way you want to. You can't talk to your father like you talk to your friends on the street. You can't say, yo, what's up? Expect a lashing. Expect a beating coming after that. Your father demands respect because with the respect, he understands that you see him on a higher elevation. You see him higher. You don't see him as you see yourself. So the Father said, I need to correct the way you speak to me. And prior to this prayer, we understand why he said, I need to correct the way you speak to me. And in verse 5 of Matthew 6, he says, and when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. That sounds like an imitator. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask them. See, now, in this moment, there is an absolute separation. A lot of people don't like to admit that Christ came to separate. He came to join his family, but he came to separate his family from the twice removed, third removed cousins that you don't know how you're connected to. And when he said this, he said, your father talked to you before. Your father spoke to you before. You know deep down inside how to speak to him. But you've learned lessons from imitators, from people who didn't get to hear a conversation with God. You've heard people who've seen the power of God being used and try to manipulate it for themselves. Because what benefit do you have praying in a corner of a street out loud with vain words and God doesn't hear you? So the Father says, why pray outside of my house when I have my doors and windows closed to you? Who are you praying to? Then it brought me to the Father that prays for you, P-R-E-Y. What the devil has done is he has played the biggest card trick game on us. And when I mean us, I'm not talking about us directly, but I say the world. Because what he has done is he has created imitations who look the part. Just like with Pharaoh, the sticks that look the part. So you go to churches, you walk down the street, you'll see people yelling and screaming, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. No souls are saved. No one comes to Christ. They're angry. They're upset. As soon as the mic is off, they've got some bad words to say. Who are these people? Why didn't they come to me? Oh, they need prayer. All of them need prayer. It shows you something. That there is a fraud, a fakeness that is in the atmosphere. And what Christ did at this moment in time was he separated the authentic from the replicas. Authentics pray, talk, speak, communicate with the Father like they're having a conversation with the Father. The replicas don't know what it's like to speak to the Father. So what they do is they make up a conversation which sounds right, which looks right. And to the eye of the flesh, that's a holy man. That's a holy woman. They are truly blessed by God. You hear the way they pray? You need to pray like that. We need to pray like that. But what's happening is that in the spirit realm, you're speaking gibberish to God. And God looks at you and says, I can't understand what you're saying. Your language, your tongue is not the tongue that I gave you. And what begins to happen is that people start to begin to speak this tongue, and they create a vocabulary for this tongue. But the tongue reaps no benefit. And what happens is that you just see people speaking in this tongue, speaking in this language all the time for no reason. And for me, I don't know about you, but for me, it irritates me sometimes. Because I feel a heat within my stomach that rises to my head. And it's just like, what are you saying? I don't understand you. Like my spirit is saying, who are you talking to? Who is your Father? Because your Father is the one that teaches you the language. And when he did the model, and in the Bible, when it's sectioned off, it's called the model prayer. Christ came down in the model of prayer. He didn't come down complicated. He didn't come down complex with all these tricks and all this stuff. He came down simple. That's why the gospel is simple. But what happens is that when you're not in the Spirit of God, it all looks complex. It all looks difficult. It's all hard to understand. So when you see an imitator, you see them imitate something that you don't see. As I was preparing this sermon, I came to understand that my testimony was not for me. All the nonsense that I had to go through, all the pain that I had to go through, all the backstabbers and all that I had to go through, it wasn't for me because I was already taken out. It was for the ones that were still in the street. The Father never forgets. And the Father always completes his plan. It's a family affair. And as I conclude, we must always understand the difference between the sons. The times are coming where They're getting smarter. And as we get lazier, they get smarter. The times are coming where the riches of this world identify them as being blessed and as being holy. The time has come so that imitators and deceivers can be stopped. The time has come, and it's so interesting why this year is the year of divine manifestation, because the time is within this year. Everybody, if you haven't gone through it yet, will go through it. A changing, an understanding, an enlightening of what is actually going on. For some, it might happen tonight. For some, it might happen tomorrow. It's a family affair. Christ did not call us to be selfish with the word. He did not call us to be selfish with his presence. He wants his family to be involved. He wants his family to rejoice in him. So my last statement is, remember that it's a family affair. Amen.